Crowe received the most unexpected gift for his breakup, a black paperback book he tossed in his locker and forgot. Months later, alone in his room in Tempe, Arizona, when he read Joseph Smith's account of the first vision, he knew it was true. That certainty carried him through a scholarship under Coach LaVell Edwards, to hard nose, to a calling in Japan, and a return to Provo he never planned. Stay with us as Chris shares how one quiet certainty became an anchor for a lifetime of faith. Welcome to the Why We Believe show, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share their inspiring stories of faith and conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. My guest today came to faith through a book a girl handed him the day she broke up with him. Chris Crowe grew up Catholic in Arizona, played football for LaVell Edwards at BYU, and went on to become one of the most decorated young adult authors in the country. His novel, Mississippi Trial, 1955, won the International Reading Association's top award, and his book, written entirely in haiku, one syllable for every American killed in Vietnam in a single year, won a Whitney Award. He spent more than 3 decades teaching at BYU, where he earned the Carl G. Mazur Award, the highest faculty honor on campus. And in 2024, the Association for Mormon Letters gave him their Lifetime Achievement Award. Chris, I'm grateful you're here.
Thank you, Nathan. I'm glad to be here.
Chris, can you start off by telling us about your life before you discovered the gospel? Just tell us your story.
Yeah. My father was raised Catholic, Irish Catholic, in a tiny town in Iowa. He married my mother. He'd just come home from the war, and she was 17, and she'd been a Lutheran all of her life, a Norwegian Lutheran in Iowa. And she had to give up her allegiance to the Lutheran Church and joined the Catholic Church for the marriage to take place. And the story goes that her mother wore a black dress to the wedding because she was in mourning about losing her daughter to a Catholic boy. But my dad, I think he was a man of faith in a kind of general, holistic way, but certainly loyal to the Catholic Church. And so we went to Mass every Sunday. And back when it was all Latin, when I was young, went to Catholic schools in my primary grades. And my father was always good friends with the priests, and they were frequent visitors to our home. And so it was just something I grew up with, thinking everybody's like me. They go to a different kind of church, but we all believe. But I think that ingrained in me a real belief in God the Father and Jesus Christ, that these heavenly beings cared about me. And I guess I never had any moments of doubt as a child anyway, because of our family's stability there. So where do I go now?
Yeah, well, why don't you tell me how you first discovered the church? What was your first exposure?
The first memory I have of it, we'd moved to Arizona from California, and one of my father's friends, one of the guys he worked with, had lived in Salt Lake City for a time. And he filled my father with all these horrible anti-Mormon ideas and pamphlets about crazy things about Latter-day Saints. And my father never really joined that bandwagon, but he believed his friend that Mormons were bigots and evil and cultish and all those kinds of things. And I'd never heard of them. So when it came up once in a while, I just thought, who are they, And so, as you know, Tempe is loaded with Latter-day Saints. And so I'm sure in junior high school, I had kids, classmates, teammates who were members of the church that I just didn't know. But in my freshman year in high school at McClintock in Tempe, right across the street from the mission home, actually, is where I first made the connection between, there's this religion that we call these kids Mormons. And these kids who are Mormons are the kinds of kids I enjoy being around. One of my good friends on the football team, Walt Denham, was a great kid, a great Latter-day Saint. And anyway, they were good kids that I looked up to. And I know our sophomore year, when everybody started drinking and partying because they could drive, I didn't like to do that stuff. And so I was stuck with the Mormon guys because they didn't go to the parties either. And so we became better friends even. And that's when they, Walt especially, but other LDS friends would invite me to what I now know as a fireside or to a steak dance or something. And I always said, no, no thanks. Sometimes they invited me to go across the street to seminary, and I would say no thanks. And but they weren't pushy about it. And I think my sophomore year too, we especially Walt and I would have late night discussions after a game or something about life and the universe. And he sometimes would bring up the church. And I still remember, I mean, he was 15, right? Him trying to explain to me the concept of the 3 degrees of glory. And it was the wildest idea I'd ever heard of in terms of religious notion that there's, three heavens or whatever it sounded like to me. It struck me sideways. And it didn't change how I felt about my friend, but I just thought, what a weird, odd church this is. And the fact that they didn't drink or smoke wasn't an odd thing to me. I mean, my family didn't mind drinking, smoking, but I think it was more when those kids tried to explain their beliefs to me as someone who was not the right audience at the time, it sounded like science fiction to me a lot of the times. In my junior year, there was a young woman who was I'd gotten to know. In my sophomore year in high school, this girl named Elizabeth had transferred into McClintock from Arcadia in Scottsdale, and she was in my.
That's where my mom went to school.
Oh, really?
At Arcadia, yeah.
She probably knew my wife and her sister Carol McConkey. And anyway, she left. They'd come from Arcadia and my sophomore English class, and she was this beautiful girl. And I thought, man, I'd like to get to know her. But I was a really stupid sophomore, wise fool, I think is what sophomore means sometimes. And I didn't know how to engage, start a conversation with an attractive girl, or I just didn't know. I was a real klutz around women. So I thought my idea was if I'll get her attention by teasing her, then she'll get to know who I am. And so my goal was to try to make her cry every day in English class. And she hated my guts for that. And obviously she remembered who I was, but she not in a positive way. So anyway, fast forward a year or so, and we somehow ran into each other in the library outside of school one afternoon, and we started talking, and the conversation went really well. And I'd grown up quite a bit. I think I realized that teasing a girl is not a way to get her attention or her affection. And we had a few conversations, and she lived around the corner from my house, and I'd see her on the street sometimes. She'd come by, we'd talk. Finally, she asked me to a Sadie Hawkins dance because she knew I would never get around to asking her. Anyway, we started dating, and it was wonderful. She was a great friend, a great person, and really a really devoted Latter-day Saint. She always was talking about the church and this and that, and this seminary teacher and her bishop and her friends in mutual and her Laurel instructor. And I didn't really know what these things were, but she just admired all these Latter-day Saints around her. And she was a part of that group of Latter-day Saints that I admired in school, these kids that were leaders in the class offices and in music, and lots of talent, lots of really great kids. So we kept dating into our senior year, and we're getting serious. And at one point she said in one of her conversations that she wanted to make sure she could get married in the temple. And I thought, fine with me, one building's the same as another. What's the big deal? And she kind of kept getting hung up on that. And I kept saying, anyway, it had a chilling effect in a relationship. And finally she just said she didn't think she could date me anymore because she didn't want to fall in love with somebody she couldn't marry in the temple. And I was perplexed by that, but I hated to see her go. And so she, it was a very dramatic moment in high school. When she moved out of my locker, that was like the divorce, that we were split up. And one of the things she gave me when we see each other in school, but while we were still in the process of breaking up, was a copy of a black paperback book called A Marvelous Work and a Wonder. And I knew it was a churchy thing, so I just tossed it in the bottom of my locker and forgot about it. But a few months passed, and I was thinking about Elizabeth, of course, still, but also about what was the big deal. Why was this book such a big deal to her? Why are Elizabeth and her friends so wired about this church they belong to? And I thought maybe I should look at the book. And so I was not the audience for LeGrand Richards. He was talking about lots of things I had way over my head. And so I was sort of flipping through, trying to find something I could make sense of, and finally landed on a narrative. It was this kid talking about an experience he'd had in the forest where he'd prayed to God to answer a question, and God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to him. And there was a moment I still remember. I was sitting in my bedroom in Tempe there, and reading this book, and just like it wasn't a vision, it wasn't a jolt or even a burning bosom or anything of that sort, but it was just that I knew that narrative I just read, a few paragraphs, were true. I knew that this kid, whoever he was, whatever, I didn't know his name, was describing a real experience. He wasn't making up a story or trying to convince me of something. He simply was reporting, this happened to me. This is what happened to me. And so I thought, well, that's a pretty straight line through. If that's really did happen, then a lot of things that happened because of that encounter he had with God probably come from God. And so after a couple of days of stewing about it, I called Elizabeth and said, hey, I'd like to learn a little bit more about this stuff. Who should I talk to? And of course, besides her, she was willing to talk, but the stake missionaries and full-time missionaries. And so we started that conversation, and the discussions in those days were really awful. If I didn't give the scripted answer, they would just ask me the question all over again. And I just thought, are these guys stupid or what? why are they asking me this? And
Yeah.
anyway, so it wasn't exactly
I remember that.
straight shot for me. It was a little bit, yeah. So anyway, there was one guy, Elder Wimpy, who was on the BYU wrestling team, and I kind of connected with him because we were both athletes, and he kind of helped me see that Mormons were all missionaries, like guys in the white shirts and suits, that they're regular people too. Anyway, I'd already made the decision to go to BYU. I accepted a football scholarship there, and so I was planning on going. It had nothing to do with the church. It was more the weather, and at the time BYU was really an awful team, and I thought I have a chance to play more because they need help, and so.
This was pre-LaVell Edwards.
Yeah. He wasn't the head coach quite yet. Well, actually, so when I went to the BYU on my official campus visit in January, my first night there, they fired the head coach and announced LaVell Edwards as the new coach. Nobody knew. I didn't know who he was. We'd never met him. And so the next morning we met him for the first time, and he was still trying to figure out himself. I think, what do you do? What do I do now? So, and he was great. And part of his personality is what convinced me to, besides escaping the desert, I just thought this would be a nice guy I like his personality as a coach. So my decision was with the missionaries, they wanted me to get baptized, right away. And I was thinking, man, but if I do, it'll blow my family up. My father still has these lingering resentments against Latter-day Saints, and it's a personal thing for him. And we weren't exactly getting along real well anyway at the time. And I thought, I don't know if I can face that. And so for me, my thought was I'll go to Provo and get baptized there, and I don't have to face my father. And the missionaries, of course, were afraid that I'd go to Provo and forget to get baptized and get away, and so they said, you got to make a decision, and before you go, you really got to decide. And so they asked me to fast and pray about it. And Elizabeth agreed. She sat in on most of the lessons, and she agreed to fast with me. And I'd never fasted in my life before that. So, and I was just eating a lot of calories. I played every sport every season, and so I was always active. And to go without food and drink was was unthinkable at the time for me, and really painful physically. It was like with withdrawal symptoms. My head was killing me, and I think we fasted maybe 36 hours. I don't know, before we finally had a chance to pray. And so Elizabeth and I both prayed, and I knew, the answer was not the easy answer. It was, you really got to tell your dad, and you really got to get baptized now. So I told the missionaries that, and they set a couple of baptism dates. At the time, I was working for a moving company, and we worked 6 days a week. And we always said you had to work till the job was done. So you had to work until your truck was empty, so it wasn't 8-hour days. They were like 12-hour days. Anyway, so I missed the first 2 baptism appointments because I was still at work. I couldn't get away to get baptized. And so finally they scheduled for a Sunday when they knew I wasn't working, and they knew I'd show up. And so I got baptized then, but the night before that, I talked to my parents. I said, "Hey, I need to talk to you guys." And in my family at the time, we didn't really have heart to hearts with our parents. They're wonderful people, but that wasn't a part of how our family worked. So it was an odd request, I think, for them. And then when I told them that, my dad he didn't blow up, but he was steaming, and my mom was crying because she knew this would be a bad thing for the family, at least for me. But he finally came around, later that night. He came to my room and he said, "Hey, when I was your age, I was making my own decisions, and so you have that right to make your own decision. You're making the wrong one, I can guarantee it, but it's your decision to make." And so that was a real concession for him. And so I got baptized the next day. And anyway, that was that. And so at BYU, my freshman year, it was living in a dorm. So the roommate, a kid from McClintock, who had also joined the church, was my roommate. And man, I was missing Elizabeth a lot. And so she was going to Mesa Community College and living at home, and we were dating. She was dating other people. I didn't really want to date anybody else. And so finally in October, I proposed to her and I said, I don't like living without you. So what do you think about getting married? And she agreed, of course, fortunately for me. And so we got married at the end of that summer. Of course, no, at the end of our freshman year. So the summer before my sophomore year, we got married, and we were barely 19, and her parents were all for it. My bishop in Provo and in Tempe, they were all for it. Nobody said a word about you thought about a mission, or it didn't dawn on me, and so a couple of years later, when President Kimball said every young man should go on a mission, I was like, oh no, I've had blown hands. I was getting married. Should I not have gotten married? And anyway, we've worked through that, but we got married, and I learned an awful lot about the church, about being a husband, being a father, all those kinds of things. Thanks to Elizabeth, she was still teaching me by example and by precept how to be the right kind of person. So, yeah.
So you actually missed your first two baptismal appointments. What was holding you back, and what finally got you to the Stake Center?
Well, part of it was just the job I had. My hours were unpredictable, and I had to kind of stay till the job was done. But I think part of it was I was scared, and I didn't know it was a big deal. I just thought it was it's just like a thing. It's not a ceremony. And so Elizabeth told me later that the missioners there, and somebody was playing the piano, and they were singing hymn after hymn, hoping I'd show up. This before cell phones, and finally they figured, I guess he's not coming, and they scheduled another one, and I thought, okay, I should be able to make that one. And then again, the work went late, and I had no way of calling, and they sang a bunch of songs, and no Chris Crowe showed up. So it was the missionaries realized. I think there was kind of a mission rule: you couldn't get baptized on Sundays, or they discouraged it. But they got permission from the president for me to get baptized on a Sunday when I could guarantee I'd be there. So they cornered me finally, I
guess. So you were baptized on July 2nd, 1972. 47 years later, on the exact same date, July 2nd, you gave your BYU devotional. Did you make that connection at the time or later?
When the invitation came, it didn't, even they asked you for a particular date, but I didn't make the connection immediately. And then I realized when I was working on the talk that, wow, this is an anniversary, a big one for me to mark that day of my baptism. And so, yeah, that was it worked out well, I think, because of the topic of the address.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that address and maybe some of the key takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, the address, I use a line from Hamlet about the undiscovered country. It was the title of the talk, and my focus was just that the future is our undiscovered country. I was thinking of my student audience. Your future is undiscovered. You don't know where you're going to be or how you're going to get there, or when it'll happen. You have faith and you have ideas and plans, but I can guarantee things are going to change. And in our life experience with Elizabeth and me, almost nothing went as planned. Almost nothing went as planned. We planned to have a big family. She wanted to have 5 kids, but after 4 or 5 years of marriage, and we didn't get pregnant. And so that was really a tough ordeal. And how do you have the Lord wants us to multiply and replenish the earth, but we're doing our best. And why isn't that happening, Lord? And, her mother died of cancer soon after we were married. And that wasn't, why would that happen? And, anyway, lots of things. And I realized in our years together, we've realized the Lord had a plan for us, but that we couldn't quite see all of. And so we had to act in faith and pray, make every decision prayerfully about what's next for us and where does the Lord want us to be. And honestly, we never, ever, we liked our time in Provo as undergraduates, but we never wanted to live in Utah again. We were devoted to Arizona and wanted to go back and live in the valley. And we had great friends and family there. And that was our plan, our dream. And here we are in Utah, and we've lived in Hawaii and Japan. That was never part of the plan. So in the devotional talk, I just shared these personal experiences and the crossroads we had to face with now what to do. These two options are available. Which path does the Lord want us to take? And I felt like that was a good message for these kids who are soon to be walking on those paths on their own.
Yeah. Talk to us about your time playing for LaVell Edwards. What was that like, and how did that impact your faith?
He, back in those days, Vince Lombardi was this famous coach of the Green Bay Packers, and he was partly well known for his brutality. One of his players wrote a memoir about being a player of the Green Bay Packers in the day, and he said that Coach Lombardi treated us all the same, like dogs. And that was kind of the style of coaching at the time. And certainly at Arizona State University, a guy named Frank Kush was the head coach, and he was brutal. He was brutal and proud of it. And his players were kind of proud to survive that brutality. And so my high school coaches had all been in that school of Lombardi, Kush, of
my high school coaches were in that same vein.
It wasn't a healthy thing. And it certainly wasn't much fun. But Coach Edwards was totally different. If we had a poor game or played poorly or lost, when I was in high school, we were dreading Monday because we just knew we'd be tortured. But with Coach Edwards, it was all about getting better. And so he didn't chew us out. He didn't punish us physically on Monday. It was like what we need to learn, what we did wrong, and learn how to be better in our next game. So this humanity was something I had never imagined. I didn't imagine this football could work that way. And he'd been a bishop. I realized later that he ran the team like a ward in some ways because he had a players' council where each organizational group, like the offensive line, defensive backs, had a representative who would meet with him once a week as a team council to talk about players and issues. And just like a ward council operates, but I didn't know that then. But he was just a wonderful guy, and he had a great sense of humor. He was self-deprecating. He made an art form of that, but he was just a great guy to be around. And it's not, we weren't buddies. I was no star. I was happy to be on the team, but being a part of that team that he created with his style, his way of running things was really something I'll never forget. And when I came to BYU as a faculty member, the thing about Coach Edwards that was remarkable is he had this amazing memory. Like when I'd see him 10 years later after playing or something, he'd ask me about my parents. He knew my parents hadn't been LDS. And I thought, why is he remembering me? This nobody. And when I joined the faculty, I got a letter from him, intercampus mail back in those days, welcoming me to the faculty and just saying, hey, if you ever need a break from the English department, come on down to the office and we can give you a break, And anyway, he was just a great human being. And his wife, Patty, who just died recently, she was the same. They're the couple were just, I think all of us who knew them got to play for LaVell, loved him and his wife. Yeah.
Tell me the story of the eviction notice that came with your diploma.
So I was an English major and I graduated in December, which is, for someone who wants to be a teacher, is not necessarily the best time to find a job in mid-year. And we were living at Wymount Terrace, married student housing on campus. And, I graduated, whatever it was, December 15th, and I didn't have a job yet. And I was looking desperately to find jobs wherever, Utah, Arizona. We just needed to have a job. And when you get a diploma, you also get the invitation to vacate your student housing. And so that was the eviction notice that we had to get out by, I don't know, the first day before Christmas. I don't remember exactly, sometime around Christmas. And it was gut wrenching because we felt totally helpless. How do we, again, make a job up here? I applied to enter the master's program at BYU and got accepted. And I thought, okay, I could stay and be a graduate student, and I could do that, but I kind of wanted to get on with life. And so I was interviewing every place I could find, and there were two schools finally that offered me a job. One was a junior high school in Salt Lake City, and one was a high school up in Ogden. And the Ogden job needed somebody who could also coach besides teaching English. And I thought, okay, that would be great, you know. So we got out just in time of Wymount Terrace and had a little trailer and drove up to Ogden and found a house, a 900 square foot house that we bought for $20,000, and thought, this is it. We're here, you know, and this is we're starting life. We're sinking our roots. We're going to raise a family here. And it was a wonderful school with great colleagues, some really great students. But probably in April, I got a call from my brother down in, who's at Marcos Deniza, saying that McClintock had an opening for English department and a football coach. And just so I know, dude, you should apply if you're interested.
And that's where I went to school, Marcos Deniza High School.
So it's like, and it was a great time, you know. I thought, wow, what could be better than going back to my alma mater and teaching and coaching there in a neighborhood that I know and families I admired. And so that was like the ideal situation. So I applied down there and went down for an interview and got offered the job. And so after just one semester at Weber High School up in Ogden, we sold our house and packed up and moved to Arizona. I thought, okay, now this is it. Now this is home. We're back. We're sinking the roots, bought a house. And McClintock was a great place to teach. Really wonderful kids. And well, actually, as an aside, one of the things that was really cool about McClintock, more than once an assistant principal would pull me aside and say something like, I don't know what it is you Mormon guys have going, but these students are the best in the school. They're the leaders. They're the heart of the very best things in school. And it was really heartwarming to hear that from someone who had no vested interest in religion, but just by noticing from working with these outstanding kids that how outstanding they were. So that was, anyway, it was a great place. And I thought, I'll be here till I die. And it didn't turn out that way.
Yeah. Tell me about the Japan decision.
So, you've heard of the 7-year itch, you know, that you get doing something for 7 years or so, and it's time to change. And so I've been going to graduate school part-time at ASU and teaching full-time at McClintock. And so I finished my master's and I was just taking my comprehensive exams to finish my doctorate. And I was burned out. I was just tired of night classes and going to summer school and school. We were starting the 7th year at McClintock, and I was weary. And one afternoon, on Friday afternoon, there was a newsletter that came from the district office saying that one of the items in it was saying that this city in Japan was looking for an English teacher for that school year, like right away. So I called Elizabeth and said, hey, how would you like to go to Japan this year? And she's like, yeah, that might be fun. so I called the number in the little note, and the guy who answered it was in charge of this sister city thing with Phoenix, and Himeji, Japan. And every year a teacher would go over, and somebody had backed out and they needed somebody right away. And I said, hey, I'm game. And he said, great. One question, are you married? I said, yeah. And he goes, they don't have housing for a married guy, so it won't work out. I said, okay. And Saturday night he calls me and he said, hey, I just was talking to the Board of Education, and they found a place for you and your wife. How soon can you get it? And I said, I don't even have a passport, but I'll get on it, you know, as soon as we can. He said, one more question. Do you have any kids? I said, yeah, we've got 2 kids. He said, oh, well, we can't. That's not going to work. We don't have housing for a kid. So then he calls me on Sunday night and says, guess what? You know, we've got a place. So we packed up and had to fight the paperwork as fast as we could and went there and had an interesting, you know, Elizabeth and I knew nothing about Japan, Japanese language, Japanese culture. We were true ignorant gaijin there. But it was a great experience for us to really be exposed to a different culture and to learn and appreciate a world totally unlike ours. So after a year, it was time to go back. And the mayor who of the city of Himeji invited me to stay for a second year. I think it's more convenient for them to have a teacher stay twice instead of coming for a new one. But I had to get back and finish my dissertation, so I just said, "Hey, keep me in mind," you know. And then just before I left, my boss had talked to the mayor again, and they were going to build a new campus of a university in Tokyo. It was going to open a campus in Himeji in the future, and they wanted to know would I be on the faculty. And I said, you know, I have to go finish this dissertation and go back to teaching high school, but keep me in mind because maybe I will, but you know, it's a few years down the road. So a few years later, I got this call, and my former boss was like, "We've been trying to find you. They've lost my phone number. This Ministry of Education is approving the faculty list right now. We need to know by Monday, are you coming or not?" And we had 4 kids by then, and we'd been to Japan. We knew how hard it was. A hard life, you know, on a bike. The winters were brutal. The winter was brutal that winter, and we knew we were getting into the second time, and we did not want to. We did not want to get into it. And I was in the bishopric in my ward at the time, and I went to the bishop and said, "Hey, Bishop, here's the deal. Tell me what to do. If you tell me to go, I'll go. If you tell me to stay, I'll stay. But you tell me what to do." And he just laughed and said, "I can't. It's not my job to tell you what to do. You need to figure it out yourself."
Not my rule.
Exactly. So, which was a good lesson for me to learn. And so I had to go back on us, you know. And so we prayed and fasted and talked to a few people we knew who'd been in Japan longer, and you know, we did not want to go, but we felt like the Lord wants us to go for some stupid reason. He wants us to go. And so we had 4 kids by then. So we had 12 suitcases and 6 carry-ons, and stole most of our stuff. On Sunday we ran our home, and we left. And it's a lifetime appointment. It was a job for life. And not knowing beforehand what's going to happen, we went blindly. We were fortunate there to have a really great bishop who spoke English well, and I was his financial clerk because numbers are numbers and Japanese are in English. And we served in the nursery because that was the level of our Japanese language skills, was talking to 3-year-olds. And kids went to public schools in Japan. There was no such thing as a Japanese as a second language class. And the international schools were way too expensive for us. And so my son learned to read and write in Japanese before he learned English. But so it was really a wonderful, enriching cultural experience and learning experience. But at the same time, it was really tough to be in a ward where about 60 people would show up for church, and six of those were my family, 6 were missionaries. It was, you know, we were obvious aliens everywhere we went in this town of 500,000, but there were probably 100 or fewer non-Japanese residents in the city. So it just was hard. And we were praying about, should we stay, should we go? We didn't have any options to go, but I started applying for jobs. And back then, before the internet, nobody wanted to interview some guy in Japan. I mean, no university is interested in a guy in Japan. And so we figured we're going to be here until we're not. And do you want me to keep going? There's more. It's a long story.
Yes, okay, please.
So our routine had been, Elizabeth and I would get up in the morning about 6, and I'd go run a mile fast and come back and pick her up, and then we'd kind of jog for a couple more miles before we came home. And then we'd go write in our journals and read scriptures before the kids woke up. So, and one thing we learned in Japan too is when the phone rings at a weird time, it's not from Japan, it's from somebody in America, because nobody in America knows what time it is in Japan. And so if my parents called, it would always be at 2 a.m. or, you know, some awkward time. So we're doing our scripture thing in the morning in our private, separate rooms, and the phone rings, and I'm thinking, okay, who is it? You know, my mom, my dad, my brother. And I answer it, and it's a guy, Lanny Bridge, who's the vice president at the time of BYU Hawaii. And he's introduces himself and says, "I want to talk to you about a job." And so I'm on the phone, and I'm snapping my fingers trying to get Liz's attention, like, "Come here." And I hadn't applied for anything. He just had heard about me. And so we talked, and he said, you know, someone had just backed out of a position, and we need somebody, you know, starting end of August. Can you come? Will you come? And you know, we didn't have to pray much about that one, but it's like, yes, we've wanted to find the next step in our life, and this sounds like a good one. So I had to do some negotiating with the university in Japan, and I taught a few extra classes before we left in the summer. And they let me out of my contract to go to Hawaii, and it was like coming coming back home, to be in the world where people spoke English, and in many ways it was a perfect midpoint for us. Literally, geographically, it was a midpoint, but culturally, it wasn't the mainland U.S., but it wasn't also Japan. It was a nice mix of Japan and the U.S., and um, people understood that we'd been abroad in a lifestyle, and the students were lovely, and the peers, the faculty were terrific, and it was a great leader in the presidency. And we bought graves because we knew we would never leave that place. We're buying our graves here now because this is where we're going to end up. And it was a wonderful, great place. And then after 4 years, a guy in the English department in Provo called me and asked me if I was interested in applying for a position. It kind of suited my background better. And I thought, no, I don't. We don't. And Elizabeth didn't want to. We loved the beach. We loved our students. Our family was happy.
Yeah, that'd be hard to leave
Yeah.
Hawaii.
And so that was easy. Yeah, it was easy to say, no, we don't want it. But then Elizabeth said, well, we really should pray about it. And she was always the one to do that. She was always the one to remind me we should pray about it. And so we did. We made the pro-con list. We talked to people who worked in Provo. We tried to imagine our lives there. And it was really a no, 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 we're not going to do it. And so when we'd fast and pray about it, we just kept getting a no answer, just nothing. I guess it'd be a stupor of thought. And then Elizabeth said, well, maybe we're praying the wrong way. So maybe what we need to do is make a decision, not pray for answers, but just make a decision that would be confirmed. So I thought, great, let's do that. So the answer is, we're going. And she said, okay. So we prayed about that, and it was still the stupor of thought. And so I said, okay, the decision then is we're staying. We're going to say, let's pray for confirmation of that. And so we did. And it was like, that's not the answer. You're not staying, And so we had to say goodbye to Hawaii and dear friends and a dear place and move to Provo. And it was hard moving here. Our kids had gone to elementary school barefooted, and the climate there is that tropical air. I mean, our kids are getting nosebleeds, and you don't use skin lotion in Hawaii, and here we had to use lotion. And people didn't understand people in our ward didn't understand that we'd been around. For them, it was moving from one ward to another was a traumatic move, and like, no, we've kind of moved around the world, and our kids are adjusting to this. And so it was hard adjustment for a year or two. And we came to love Provo and BYU and my students and colleagues, all that stuff. But it certainly wasn't the plan to end up here. And that really was the heart of my devotional talk was, that you might think you know where you're going, but the Lord knows, and you have to, if you want to be happy, you have to figure out what he wants and go where he wants you to go. And so we've learned that we never just say we're here for good, because we learned as soon as we say it, we're going to be gone. So we feel pretty comfortable here in Provo after 33 years, but who knows? We could end up somewhere that we're not expecting. I'd be really surprised if that happened at this point in my life, but who knows, right?
How did all of those travels, all of those adventures help bring you and your family closer to Jesus Christ?
Well, one of the things about living in Japan is the saints there who are active are faithful. Boy, they're faithful and determined. And we were fortunate to know some really great people. But still, there was that language barrier and stuff. And so we were kind of unto ourselves. We went to church every Sunday, and our kids went to primary, and my wife and I did what we could to serve. But it really was it was kind of home-centered church for us. So home evening and scripture reading. We had the illustrated scripture for our kids when they were little, and church videos back in the day of the VHS videotapes that you could buy. And that was kind of what we had to do to help our kids learn the gospel. And of course, we had the missionaries over as often as we could, like every past Sunday for sure. But they're always in our home, and that blessed our lives too, to get to know these great missionaries over a 3-year period, almost 4-year period. So that, I think, just the isolation didn't, I guess, force is not the right word, but gave us the opportunity to really think about how can we rely on the Lord when we need him to. Hawaii was different. In Laie, almost everyone's a member of the church, but there are other cultural differences and challenges sometimes, and so we had to kind of hang together and learn how to respect other people's beliefs or actions, and still live the way we thought we should be living. Again, we had great mentors and examples that helped us learn and be a family and learn how to behave. Then moving to Provo was really probably harder on our kids than it was on us, because it was their milieu was much different from mine, and being in high school and where everybody's LDS, but not everybody acts it. And so that was a different challenge for us as a family to lean on Christ and teach our kids. And we weren't the best teachers at home, and our kids weren't the best students at home always either, but we did our best. And again, it's like when we were in high school, Elizabeth was the one who's the driving force, not in a mean way or even in a pushy way, but just she had such a strong testimony that we all, I think, hung on to her examples, and she would always prompt us to do the best thing, the right thing, even if it was hard, and encourage us to be mindful. And so I think all those challenges, the decisions we've had to make, and the sacrifices our kids have had to make, leaving friends and going to new and sometimes strange place, helped us grow together in faith, knowing the Lord's going to provide a way somehow. He's going to make it better. And not everything was easy, and sometimes they didn't become things that get solved as fast as we thought they would or hoped they would, but they worked out.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today, Chris. In conclusion, why do you believe?
I believe because the option, I guess, is so awful. The other option is unthinkable. And I still go back to that simple faith. I mean, I have a lot of really, really, really smart friends who aren't smart. They're not smart just in their academic fields, but also in the gospel or in church history and doctrine, those kinds of things. And I've always been a simpleton in church matters, I think, because my testimony is built on that paragraph I read by Joseph Smith, that he saw the Heavenly Father in Jesus Christ. And I know he did. I know he did. And so the twists and turns in church history that have happened in a couple of centuries, and things that people have done they shouldn't have done, or whatever that bothers some people, it's just kind of rolled off my back, because I think, people are human. They do dumb things, or they do bad things. But I still know that Joseph Smith saw God the Father and Jesus Christ, and I know the church he founded is based on those precepts. And I know President Oaks right now is the prophet the Lord has chosen. And so I guess I believe because I love the Lord, and I find peace. And in my life, I've found peace in doing what the Lord wants me to do, and doing what he wants our family to do. And so I can't imagine living a life without that kind of guarantee of peace, and certainly not peace and prosperity, but peace and comfort that comes from knowing the Lord is the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, that story of the first vision is such a powerful story. My testimony goes right through the middle of that as well, and as I'm sure it does, millions of church members. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for being with us today, Chris.
Been a pleasure.
And here are my key takeaways from this episode. Number 1, a testimony built on Christ alone, not on comfort or plans, can become unshakable. Number 2, the Lord prepares you for callings through seasons that sometimes don't make sense until you look back. Number 3, faith is saying yes to God's plan, even when it contradicts everything you've built. Number 4, a spouse who calls you to pray more humbly is a gift that deepens your faith. And finally, uncertainty and sacrifice abroad can deepen your testimony more than any security at home. If Chris's story, built on the first vision and tested through Japan, Hawaii, and a return to Provo, has strengthened your faith, please take a moment to help share the story. You can leave a rating and review for Why We Believe at Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to or watching this episode. And you can leave a comment and tell us which moment in Chris's journey resonated most with you, so more people can find these episodes. We also invite you to visit whywebelieve.com, where you can subscribe for our newsletter to get the episodes, and at the same time, download your free guide with 13 strategies how to increase your faith in Jesus Christ.